A breakthrough in nuclear fusion. We could finally solve all our energy problems and perhaps even move up a level of civilization in cosmic terms. Let's take a closer look at this in this video, so stay tuned until the end. Unlimited power, said a wise man named Emperor Palpatine, and maybe he was right, because there are huge breakthroughs in nuclear fusion. Let's try to get this video 1,000 likes, then YouTube will show it to more people who can then learn about these achievements. It's a shame how negatively many people look at the future, as if our civilization is on the brink of collapse when there are so many exciting things happening right now. With the Starship, we have a spaceship that will make us an interplanetary species. The revolution in artificial intelligence will take our lives to a whole new level. And in terms of energy supply, there are massive advances in nuclear fusion. So I would say, reason enough for optimism. Let me know in the comments how you see it. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future of humanity? I'd be very interested to know. Nuclear fusion is a decisive key to this. You could say that mastering nuclear fusion is an important step up the Kardashev scale. The Kardashev scale is a concept from theoretical astrophysics that was developed to classify the technological progress of a civilization based on the amount of usable energy. It comprises three main types. Type 1 civilizations can harness all the available energy of their planet. Type 2 civilizations control the energy of their entire star. And Type 3 civilizations harness the energy of an entire galaxy. This scale helps scientists to understand the potential energy consumption levels and thus the technological development of extraterrestrial civilizations. I really like the concept because it shows that progress equals energy. So it's clear that if we really want to become an interstellar species, we would have to climb up the Kardashev scale, and we need a lot of energy to do that. Fittingly, there has been a massive breakthrough in nuclear fusion. There are two ways of using nuclear energy: nuclear fission, which is used in current nuclear power plants, and nuclear fusion. In nuclear fission, uranium atoms are split to release energy. This is an incredibly efficient form of energy that is also CO2 neutral and therefore very environmentally friendly. In Germany, the political decision has been made to shut down this low CO2 form of energy and to burn more coal instead, selling this to the people as an energy transition. While every live CO2 map of Europe proves that Germany has become one of the continent's biggest climate polluters as a result of this energy transition. Of course, nuclear waste is a disadvantage of nuclear power, but in my opinion, the issue is usually exaggerated. Compared to other types of waste, nuclear waste takes up comparatively little space, especially as modern technologies enable the compaction and solidification of radioactive material. New technologies for reprocessing nuclear waste and reducing the half-life of certain radioactive isotopes are likely to be added in the future, and advances in transmutation technology could lead to dangerous isotopes being converted into less harmful or even stable elements. The icing on the cake is that advanced reactors will soon be able to recycle the fuel contained in nuclear waste. From my point of view, this is a problem that you can absolutely accept if you are really interested in being more climate friendly and emitting less CO2. But please let me know your opinion on nuclear energy in the comments. Is the nuclear phase out the right way to go, or do you agree with me that it was a mistake? Today we're not talking about nuclear fission, but about nuclear fusion. You can think of nuclear fusion a bit like the reverse principle. Lighter atoms are converted into heavier atoms to release energy. This is the same process that takes place in the plasma core of the sun and supplies our planet with lots of energy. If this fusion process could be imitated on Earth, it would probably be the solution to all our energy problems. The use of nuclear fusion could mean a virtually unlimited source of energy. It would produce no long-term waste, emit no greenhouse gases, and pose no or very, very little risk of nuclear meltdown. This is why people have been dreaming of nuclear fusion power plants for a long time, but so far it has only been a dream. There's the old joke: fusion reactors are only 20 years away, as they said 30 years ago. Fusion itself is already technically possible, but the problem is that you have to get a net energy gain in the end. In other words, a fusion power plant has to produce more energy than you have to put in to trigger the fusion process. That somehow makes sense. The start of energy production is called ignition, and in 2021 there was already a huge breakthrough at the National Ignition Facility, or NIF for short, at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in the USA. The NEF used 192 laser beams that generated a total of 1.9 megajoules of energy over a period of a few nanoseconds to trigger the fusion reaction. The fuel is contained in a metal capsule a few millimeters in diameter, which when heated by the lasers emits X-rays that heat and compress the fuel. So we are really talking about highly complex processes that take place in a tiny space. With this process, which I have just described, a groundbreaking energy generation of 1.3 megajoules was achieved on August 8, 2021, the highest value ever measured with the inertial method. In other words, the value of energy generated that came closest to the required ignition energy up to that point. But I can already hear some of you asking confusedly,
inertial method, is that what I do every morning before my first coffee?
Let's briefly clarify these terms before we look at what an even bigger breakthrough has now been achieved at the NIF. The start of energy production in nuclear fusion is called ignition, and before the NIF success, the record was set in 1997 by the Joint European Torus in England, where 16 megawatts of power were generated by magnetic fusion, but 23 megabytes were required for ignition. In other words, the best result we had before the breakthrough at the NIF involved a net loss of a lot of energy. So what is the inertial confinement process? There are two ways to achieve nuclear fusion. Magnetic confinement, where powerful magnets are used to confine fuel plasma for very long periods of time, and inertial confinement, where very powerful and short laser pulses are used to compress the fuel and start the fusion reaction. This inertial confinement is the process used at the NIF. Then came the next milestone at the end of 2022. The NIF researchers announced that they had fulfilled the so-called Lawson criterion during ignition. In 1955, physicist John Lawson developed a series of criteria to recognize when an ignition, as we have just described, has taken place. It is also known as the Lawson criterion, and it determines when a nuclear fusion reaction taking place in a plasma is self-sustaining. In other words, it maintains itself in a macroscopic amount of fuel. Put simply, the proportion of the fusion power released that remains in the plasma must be at least as large as the power loss of the plasma for the Lawson criterion to be met. And although no immense amounts of energy were gained in the experiment at the NIF, it is an incredibly important step that the Lawson criterion has been achieved for the first time in a controlled reaction, i.e. the self-sustainability of nuclear fusion has been achieved, because this is of course exactly what is needed in future nuclear fusion reactors. If you have to constantly inject energy yourself to keep nuclear fusion running, then you can save yourself the trouble altogether. In December 2022, the researchers also succeeded for the first time in achieving a net energy gain from nuclear fusion, albeit minimal. So the researchers at the National Ignition Facility not only managed to achieve a world record in energy yield from a nuclear fusion experiment, but also the first time to create a nuclear fusion reaction that could sustain itself. Absolutely revolutionary. The only problem was that they didn't manage to repeat the whole thing afterwards. You know how it is, you manage to pull off a really cool move, like hitting the garbage can with a piece of paper from 5 meters away, then you want to repeat it and it just won't work again. Until now. Because the next breakthrough came on July 30th, 2023. Paul Ryan, spokesman for the NIF, says, in an experiment conducted on July 30th, we repeated the ignition at the National Ignition Facility. Analysis of these results is ongoing, but the experiment produced a higher yield than the last test. The exact results are still being kept under wraps, but the energy yield must be higher than last time. In December 2022, the first positive energy balance in a fusion experiment using lasers achieved an energy production of 3.15 megajoules after the laser had emitted 2.05 megajoules onto the target, so we would have gotten 150% of the energy out that was put directly in. And if that has now been topped again, then we are probably talking about more than 200%, even if it is still speculation. The details will probably be discussed in a little more detail soon as we read in a statement from the laboratory. Analysis of these results is ongoing. As is our standard practice, we plan to report these results at upcoming scientific conferences and in peer-reviewed publications. However, I have to add a small downer because although this is a huge success, it is far from being suitable for power generation, as the results are a bit of a milkmaid's bill. Is it still okay to say that, or is it discriminatory against milkmaids? We don't know. Either way, the 150% energy generation only includes the energy that the laser fires directly. But if you are completely honest, you would also have to take into account the indirect energy that the laser needs to operate in the first place. And if you do that, the result looks a little more sobering. Then we arrive at an energy input of 322 megajoules. With an output of 3.15 megajoules, we would have gotten just under 1% of the energy input back out again. But I still think that these are immensely important steps towards successful large-scale nuclear fusion, and the success stories are piling up. At the NIF alone, we've had at least 3 major successes to celebrate since 2021, and if we look 20 years into the future, I'm optimistic that we'll master nuclear fusion. One fact that always strikes me as a bit Star Trek-like is that even space organizations are researching nuclear fusion, especially NASA, because logically, nuclear fusion would be an absolute breakthrough for space travel, and clever people at NASA have come up with an ingenious concept. the lattice confinement reactor. And if it really works, we may soon be jetting off to the stars in fusion ships. When you think of NASA, you might think of the moon landing or the Voyager probes buzzing around far out in the solar system, but not so much of nuclear fusion technologies. But it looks like it could be the space agency NASA of all people that gives us the decisive breakthrough in nuclear fusion. The process takes place naturally in the universe in the stars. Our sun fuses almost 600 million tons of hydrogen into helium every second. If we could implement this process here on Earth, we would have solved our energy problem, but annoyingly, it is extremely difficult to artificially create the conditions within the sun here on Earth. Basically, atoms don't actually want to fuse together. They repel each other because of the charges. According to the Lawson criterion, we either have to massively increase the pressure or heat the fusion material to around 100 million degrees Celsius. But this requires enormous amounts of energy to cool the equipment and maintain the fusion. So where does NASA come in? In their search for a new way to power their space probes, NASA scientists have found a way to build a fusion reactor that is much simpler, much more compact, and potentially much more efficient than any other we have today. NASA engineers' ingenious invention is called the lattice confinement reactor. Lattice confinement is a much more elegant and low-power way to make hydrogen atoms dense enough to fuse. To understand this, we logically have to go down to the atomic level. A metal lattice is used for lattice confinement. At the molecular level, all metals have a crystal structure. This means that the atoms are arranged in a uniform, repeating pattern, the so-called lattice. Hydrogen can be pressed into certain metal lattices and occupy the spaces between metal atoms. This works particularly well with the metallic element erbium. Here, the metallic bonds press the hydrogen very tightly together. If you press hydrogen into such an erbium lattice, i.e. what you do when you're bored, this is known as deuterated erbium. The hydrogen atoms in this deuterated erbium are squeezed really tightly together, almost as tightly as the passengers in a low-cost airline plane in summer. This is almost enough for the hydrogen atoms to fuse, but unfortunately not quite yet, but NASA was able to add this missing bit for fusion externally. All NASA engineers had to do was shoot some gamma rays at the deuterated erbium. Some of these gamma rays hit a hydrogen atom directly and cause it to dissociate, turning it into a fast neutron and a proton. The fast neutron collides with another hydrogen atom and is hurled away at high speed. You can imagine it a bit like playing billiards when you accidentally sink the black ball at full speed. This new high-speed hydrogen atom hits another one with enough force and boom, fusion is triggered. Just realize what that means. Without huge lasers or superconducting magnets, NASA was able to build a nuclear fusion reactor with a simple piece of metal and a gamma ray. I find that incredible, and that is of course also the great advantage of the lattice confinement reactor. In contrast to other nuclear fusion reactors, it is incredibly easy and inexpensive to build, and of course can be scaled up much faster than, for example, a huge project like the ITER reactor, which has been under construction and planned for years. You could now ask yourself the question,
so why don't I have a grid confinement reactor in my garage yet?
Good question. NASA is working on it. The first experiments to prove that it works at all were carried out in 2020. Now NASA has to figure out how to increase the number of fusion events in the erbium lattice and how to extract the energy efficiently. Neither of these is easy. Basically, it has to be said that the lattice confinement reactor suffers from the same problem as the other nuclear fusion reactors. In the end, it doesn't even come close to producing enough energy, but I still consider the lattice confinement reactor to be one of the most promising methods, as it is comparatively simple to build and therefore alone outperforms the other methods. And if it worked, then space travel would be absolutely revolutionized. Suddenly, all spacecraft could be equipped with a small, lightweight energy source that could provide high performance for months or even years. Such technology would be a great help to the people who are trying to make Mars their home. Then you could just fly over to Mars with the grid confinement shuttle and visit Grandma Erna, who lives in a retirement home with a view of Olympus Mons. And of course, this technology would also revolutionize life on Earth. Lattice confinement reactors are easy to build and comparatively cheap, so if the energy generation breakthrough were to succeed, the world could switch to nuclear fusion incredibly quickly. With the other methods, complex fusion plants would have to be built first, which would probably take several decades. But it's not just NASA that is hard at work. Scientists here in Europe are also working diligently on the self-sustaining fusion process, and the most promising and largest project is the ITER reactor in France. What the fusion researchers have achieved will really blow your mind. Let's take a look. Let's travel back to 1985 in the middle of the Cold War. As a sign of mutual rapprochement and diplomatic detente, US President Ronald Reagan and Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev proposed a plan to build a nuclear fusion facility together with other countries. That was the birth of the ITER reactor, so the plan is already a few years old. Concrete planning began in 1988, but the actual reactor building has only been standing since 2020, 35 years after the project was first announced. So we are really talking about a long-term project here. Right now, however, the exciting phase is finally underway, as the actual fusion reactor is now being built in the reactor building in the south of France. Here you can see a representation of the system as it will look when completed. In the center, we see the ring-shaped vacuum vessel in which the burning plasma will be located, hanging in space below a person for size comparison. To start nuclear fusion, all the gas is first pumped out of the ring-shaped vacuum chamber, then an external magnetic field is created and hydrogen gas is introduced. Now the actual heart of the ITER reactor begins its work. The central magnet generates an electric field that rips electrons from the hydrogen atoms in the chamber, turning them into a plasma. The plasma begins to move faster and faster and heats up to an immense heat. This is extremely important for nuclear fusion to work at all. However, as the heat generated by the movement of the plasma stream alone is not enough to generate the necessary temperature of around, and now listen carefully, 150 million degrees, external heating sources are also used. The plasma is bombarded with electromagnetic radiation and deuterium atoms. This process is known as neutral injection. The plasma is finally heated to 150 million degrees by the plasma's own heating, electromagnetic radiation, and neutral injection. And now the conditions are in place for the hydrogen isotopes deuterium and tritium to fuse to form helium. In other words, nuclear fusion can take place under these conditions. What I have just described to you is at least the plan. None of this has yet been put into practice at ITER. The criticism of the entire project is very, very loud and not entirely unjustified, as the originally planned cost for the entire project were around $5 billion. In the meantime, the actual costs have quadrupled to over $20 billion. Some technical details have also not yet been fully clarified. How can the heat be safely dissipated from the reactor at more than 100 million degrees? How will fresh fuel be supplied? These are just two aspects that are not yet completely clear. Another main argument put forward by critics is that development is taking far too long to avert climate change. The money invested in ITER could be much better spent on existing renewable energies, such as wind and solar energy, in order to do something about climate change in the short term. Here's my opinion. I think most of the counter-arguments are rather weak, especially the climate change argument. If the breakthrough in nuclear fusion actually succeeds, we will be able to produce so much energy that wind and solar energy can be relegated to the history books as archaic technologies. It is somehow a strange idea to shelve the development of a far superior technology because the lesser technology already exists. With such an argument, we are still in the Stone Age today. Imagine if someone had said to Carl Benz in 1886, "Listen, Carl, just stop with your gas-powered vehicle. Better invest the money and effort in the further development of horse-drawn carriages. They already exist and they work well." Now, some people will argue, yes, but we have to act quickly now to stop climate change. I think people who argue like that fail to realize that the whole thing is not an either-or situation. I think the countries involved in ITER, such as France, Germany, and South Korea, are perfectly capable of spending a few billion on research into nuclear fusion and promoting other areas of energy production at the same time. By way of comparison, consider how little $20 billion has actually been spent on the ITER reactor so far. The American government had expenditures of just under $10 trillion in 2020 alone, and that's just the official spending. That doesn't even take into account how much new money has been created by the Federal Reserve's money printer in that time. In view of this, I think the relatively small sum invested in the ITER reactor is a very good investment. With regard to the technical difficulties mentioned, I am optimistic that these can be solved, as all hurdles have been so far. Some time ago, for example, there were still doubts as to whether the magnet required for the reactor was even feasible. In 2021, the 1,000-ton magnet, which was built by General Atomics in the USA, was completed and will be transported to the ITER reactor in France. The magnet is over 18 meters high, 4.2 meters wide, and can generate a magnetic field with a strength of 13 Tesla. Hold on tight, that's 280,000 times stronger than the Earth's magnetic field. According to ITER, this makes it the strongest magnet in the world, and current forecasts assume that ITER will achieve positive net energy generation for the first time by 2025. Nature itself is often the best teacher. After all, it has had millions of years to develop ingenious designs and solutions to problems, and many principles principles of modern technology are copied from nature. Why shouldn't this also work for nuclear fusion? Because, this is no joke, there is a crab that may hold the secret of fusion. Now, a British company has developed a technique that looks really promising. But what does this breakthrough in nuclear fusion have to do with a crab? Technological advances have often been inspired by processes in nature, and the abilities of the so-called crayfish are so incredible that they are virtually predestined to serve as the basis for a technological breakthrough. The name of this type of crab says it all. They are able to produce extremely loud noises. A special mechanism in their claws is responsible for this. A quick movement and hooking of the claws creates a small bubble in the water, a so-called cavitation bubble, which implodes shortly afterwards due to the jerky release of the claws. This sounds inconspicuous, but it is quite something. Flashes of light and incredible temperatures of several thousand degrees are generated. The record is a measurement of almost 47200 degrees. The effect is so powerful that it even interfered with sonar equipment used to locate submarines during the Second World War. And the crabs use this process for numerous purposes, for catching prey, mating fights, and also for communicating with conspecifics. It's a good thing that these crabs don't get very big, otherwise one or two swimmers on the beach would have been in for a nasty and above all loud surprise. The ability of the crayfish is absolutely fascinating, but what does this have to do with nuclear fusion? According to the Lawson criterion, atoms must be exposed to extreme pressures or high kinetic energy, for example through heat, in order to undergo nuclear fusion. On Earth, we need enormous amounts of energy to do this. The previous approach to inertial confinement fusion was to use a large, expensive laser to ignite it. However, the British company First Light Fusion has come up with another creative alternative for the process. They want to trigger the fusion ignition using a high-speed projectile. A 10mm cube is shot at, which is in free fall in the reactor. Inside this cube is a small fuel capsule containing hydrogen. The force of the impact creates enormous pressure, which starts the fusion. The cube itself is a special feature. It acts as a kind of amplifier that distributes the shock waves on the surface of the fuel capsule. In contrast to laser nuclear fusion, the fuel is compressed not just from one direction, but from different directions. At the moment, the process is still theoretical, but if it actually works as planned, the cost for ignition could be reduced by a factor of 4. The mechanism of first light is really similar to that of the crayfish, whose scissors snap shut with such force and speed that the crayfish triggers a shock wave in the water. You could say that the water is literally torn apart, causing a gas bubble to form for a very brief moment, which briefly reaches temperatures of several thousand degrees in its interior. Do the little crabs realize what brilliant scientists they actually are? Perhaps there is a specimen somewhere on the seabed with the name Albert Nolstein or something. What am I saying here again? However, a lot more work and research will have to be invested in first light fusion before the principle is ready for the market. Physicist Dr. Ben Miles predicts that it will take around 10 years from this point until cracker fusion is commercially viable. Now, some of you may be saying,
10 years? That makes me 10 years older.
But compared to other fusion projects, that really is an extremely short period of time. By way of comparison, the ITER fusion reactor in France is not expected to produce really significant energy gains that can be used commercially until the 2050s. So if the expectations prove to be true, then first light fusion technology is our best hope for the much-awaited energy breakthrough. Nuclear fusion is the holy grail of energy production, so to speak. But until we have achieved this, there are of course other promising concepts, and one of them is being tested in China, a thorium molten salt reactor. Let's take a look at what this thorium reactor is all about. Nuclear energy is an incredibly efficient method of power generation that is also very environmentally friendly due to the lack of CO2 emissions. But the problem that many people see with it is the risk of a radioactive accident. Thorium reactors could be a solution to the problem as they provide large and cheap amounts of nuclear energy, still in theory, and require neither cooling water for the fuel rods nor uranium. As the name suggests, thorium is used as fuel. Some of you may recognize this from World of Warcraft. But it also exists in real life. Thorium is a weakly radioactive metal that occurs in rocks and is a waste product of rare earth mining. At the moment, it is hardly used industrially, but the rare earth industry in China is growing rapidly, making it an attractive alternative for the Chinese to uranium, most of which has to be imported. Lyndon Edwards, nuclear engineer at the Australian Nuclear Science and Technology Organization, said, Thorium is much more abundant than uranium, so using it in this way would be a very useful technology for the next 50 or 100 years when uranium reserves run out. Inside a thorium reactor, molten salts circulate instead of water, which it is hoped will produce nuclear energy that is much safer and relatively cheap, as well as producing much less radioactive waste than traditional nuclear power plants. Sounds too good to be true, but it's not really true yet, because there is still no fully functional thorium reactor. However, this could now change as the Chinese started the test run for their first thorium reactor at the beginning of 2024. The reactor is located in Wuwei on the border with the Gobi Desert, and if the test works, the amount of energy generated will still be limited. As it is only a test reactor, it is expected to generate 2 megawatts of thermal energy. This could supply around 1,000 households, so perhaps a few houses on the edge of the Gobi Desert will soon be able to benefit from thorium energy. But if the test works, we can work on scaling up thorium energy production, but that will take some time. If the test is successful, China plans to build a reactor with a capacity of 373 megawatts by 2030, which will then supply hundreds of thousands of households with electricity, so it will probably be some time before the entire country, 1.4 billion people, can be supplied with thorium electricity. Let's take a closer look at the technical details. The idea of operating a reactor with molten salt instead of water as a coolant is not new. In the USA, a liquid salt reactor was operated at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Tennessee until 1969, but was then shut down due to unsatisfactory results. The Chinese liquid salt reactor in Wuwei is basically a replica of the Oak Ridge reactor, but with all kinds of improvements. The biggest difference is that no thorium was used in the Oak Ridge liquid salt reactor. But why liquid salt at all? What are the advantages? Charles Forsberg from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology describes it like this: compared to light water reactors in conventional nuclear power plants, molten salt reactors operate at much higher temperatures, so they could generate electricity much more efficiently. The reactor in Wuwei will use fluoride-based salts that melt into a transparent liquid at a temperature of around 450 degrees. The salt then serves as a coolant and absorbs the heat from the reactor core. The biggest advantage, however, is that in liquid salt reactors, instead of solid fuel rods as in conventional nuclear power plants, the liquid salt acts as a substrate for the fuel, in this case thorium, which is then dissolved directly in the core. This is extremely important because the fact that the fuel is already dissolved in the liquid salt massively reduces the probability of a core meltdown.
Oh, you stupid son of a...
However, not all researchers are convinced by the use of thorium as a fuel. The problem with thorium is that, unlike naturally occurring uranium isotopes, it first has to be converted into a fissile material. This means that there is one more intermediate step than with uranium, which is used in conventional nuclear power plants. This intermediate step looks like this. The isotope thorium-232 cannot be fissioned. However, when it is irradiated in a reactor, it forms the isotope uranium-233, which in turn is a fissile material that generates heat. So whether thorium is really suitable for generating such large amounts of energy is still somewhat uncertain. And in the case of the Wuwei reactor, there is the additional complication that the Chinese are not particularly forthcoming about their technologies. Western researchers are completely denied access to the reactor, and most of the information comes from third parties or from official reports from the Chinese government, which are not always entirely credible, to put it mildly. Simon Middleburg from the Nuclear Future Institute at Bangor University in Wales said, "We will make so many new scientific discoveries, but if something goes wrong along the way, you can't carry on. You have to stop and start again. If I was allowed to, I would fly there in an airplane immediately." So it remains exciting, and we can see once again that research and innovation in the field of nuclear energy is our best chance of generating climate-friendly electricity. As things stand, nuclear energy is also the only realistic way for space travel to cover greater distances and take us humans deeper into space. I just said that nuclear fusion is the holy grail of energy generation, and that is true. But the principle can also be taken to the extreme. After all, our sun is the largest nuclear fusion reactor in the solar system. Unfortunately, current solar energy technology only allows us to use energy in a rudimentary way. But what if we could develop a megastructure that would allow us to harvest all of the sun's nuclear fusion energy? We are talking about a Dyson sphere, and what if alien species had already built such Dyson spheres and we could track them down? It is very likely that alien species that are more advanced than us and better at using energy, an alien species so advanced that it could even travel the galaxy, would have to have a damn good and almost infinite source of energy. Conveniently, our galaxy is full of such energy sources, stars. Stars like our Sun are gigantic nuclear fusion power plants in which huge amounts of fusion energy are released every second. Every second, 564 million tons of hydrogen are converted into 560 million tons of helium, so our Sun loses 4 million tons of weight every second. Exactly what I gain every second as soon as my mom starts serving sauerbraten and dumplings at Christmas time. Stars produce such huge amounts of energy that they are basically enough to power a civilization for a long time and make the most advanced interstellar travel technologies possible. The problem is that it is very difficult to utilize the full energy potential of a star. Solar cells, for example, without wanting to comment in principle on the usefulness of this technology, are not able to fully utilize even the solar energy arriving on Earth and have huge energy losses. For example, if people covered every square centimeter of the Earth's surface with solar panels, this would generate more than 10 to the power of 17 joules of energy per second. However, the majority of the energy emitted by the Sun would still be lost, namely around 10 to the power of 26 joules per second. This is therefore incredibly inefficient. To become an interstellar civilization, we need something more. I'm talking about mega structures, so-called Dyson spheres. If there are interstellar advanced species, we can assume that they would use such Dyson spheres. So the question naturally arises, what is a Dyson sphere? Put simply, it is a hypothetical construct that could be built entirely around a star in order to optimally capture and utilize its energy. The whole thing is named after the famous physicist Freeman Dyson, who developed the idea in 1960. If an advanced civilization really wants to use the enormous energy of its home star, it will not promote solar cells on its planet by law, but will have to build megastructures directly around the star to capture all the energy. Dyson's original proposal of a massive sphere with 100% coverage of the star doesn't quite work, as it would be impossible to keep the star in the center, and the entire sphere would then be destroyed due to the extreme tidal and rotational stresses. But in a modified form, the whole thing would work perfectly, and an advanced species could build rings or swarms of solar collectors that surround the star but still let some of the light and energy through. That way, an alien species could channel gigantic amounts of energy, build a super advanced society, and everyone is happy. And if they haven't died, they still want to phone home today. But it's not all peace, happiness, and pancakes after all. Even such a high-tech setup doesn't work forever, because stars only have a certain length of existence. An average star, like our Sun, exists for a few billion years, then inflates into a red giant and finally implodes into a white dwarf, a super dense remnant of the original star. A dense, very hot stellar corpse, so to speak. This is what our Sun is facing, but luckily it will be another 5 billion years before it has completely died and become a white dwarf, so don't stress, folks. If we assume that an alien species that can build a Dyson sphere is past the point where it would accidentally self-destruct through nuclear war or something, so it will exist well into the time when it needs a new star because the old home star has finished fusing. And this is where a super exciting research paper by astronomy professor Ben Zuckerman comes in, suggesting that we should focus our search for aliens on dead stars and abandoned Dyson spheres. After all, according to the considerations we have just made, the Milky Way should be full of dead stars that were enveloped by other civilizations with Dyson spheres in the past. Because you have to remember that our galaxy has been around for 10 billion years. In such a long period of time, quite a few alien species, Dyson spheres, and stellar fusion processes could have gone down the drain. And this consideration allows scientists to establish a direct link between the lifespan of stars and the occurrence of Dyson spheres. If astronomers search around white dwarfs, stars that have died, and find Dyson spheres, then that can help estimate how many advanced civilizations exist in the galaxy. I wish such cool examples had been used in my math book at school. And not with problems like a man buys 800 bananas, gives away 2/8 of them. How many bananas does he have left? The logic behind the calculation is as follows. Astronomers have unfortunately only been able to measure a small fraction of all the white dwarfs in the galaxy so far, as the rest are simply too far away from us. But if enough aliens have decided to build Dyson spheres around their stars, then we should actually find at least one Dyson sphere in our investigations. If we see none at all, then that puts an upper limit on the number of alien civilizations building Dyson spheres around white dwarfs. Of course, there could also be aliens who choose not to build Dyson spheres. Maybe for religious reasons or because they have an incompetent government or something, but the research paper argues that given the immense age of the Milky Way, it is likely to discover Dyson spheres of alien species and stars that have already died, i.e. white dwarfs. But actually, finding these structures will be difficult. Professor Ben Zuckerman comments, if there are Dyson spheres, they will probably be hard to find because there are so many stars to search through. The signal from the Dyson sphere will probably be very weak compared to the star it orbits. What would such an alien Dyson signal even look like? What should we look for? The presence of a Dyson sphere around a white dwarf would likely have two major effects. If the structure is large enough or close enough to its star, it will partially block the light reaching Earth. This is also the case with exoplanets that pass in front of their star. This so-called transit method has been used to detect the majority of all exoplanets to date. But Dyson spheres could also leave behind an infrared signal because such megastructures would probably absorb the white dwarf's radiation and convert its energy into other things. Since such a conversion can never be 100% efficient, this process will leave behind some waste heat that escapes as infrared light. And here's the thing. Surprisingly, we have already found many white dwarfs with excess infrared emission, but before you shout with joy,
"We found aliens!"
unfortunately, I have to tell you that most of the infrared radiation comes from cosmic dust in these star systems, but who knows? It is absolutely possible that there is a white dwarf or two among them whose Dyson sphere radiates in the infrared range, and the following calculations can make us optimistic. In his work, Ben Zuckerman once extrapolated how many civilizations could exist in the Milky Way based on these assumptions that have built Dyson spheres around their star. And his incredible result, there could potentially be up to 9 million such highly developed species in the galaxy. That would be truly spectacular, but it is of course only a theoretical estimate, and Professor Zuckerman himself is also somewhat cautious. Some astronomers, myself included, believe that technological life is very rare. It could even be that we have the most advanced technology in our Milky Way, but nobody knows, so it's worth looking for evidence. I would be very interested in your opinion. Is it likely that there are Dyson spheres built by aliens in our galaxy, or is this complete nonsense, and if so, why? Do alien species perhaps not even get that far because they wipe themselves out first? Let me know your thoughts on the subject in the comments. I hope you're all nuclear fusion experts now. As soon as there are any more breakthroughs, I'll keep you updated immediately, but of course you can only do that if you follow my channel. Subscribing is absolutely free, you'll never miss another galactic video, and will help me immensely. Thank you guys so much. With nuclear fusion, we could probably build advanced spaceships and jet through the cosmos because we might be able to power a warp drive, and I know that sounds like science fiction, but there has also just been an amazing breakthrough in warp research. Scientists have accidentally created a warp bubble in the lab, so will we soon be jetting through space like Captain Kirk? You can find out all about it in the video below, be sure to watch it. And if you want to support my work, have a look at my Astro shop. Every purchase helps me a lot, otherwise I'll see you in the next video. Take care, friends.